Have your sanity in order, because it would be put to the trial in this mystifying process. Welcome, my mere mortal lads, to another round of the book reviews. My name is Kyrin, and I do these reviews for those who want to transcend beyond their own mere mortality to get some juicier info from the books that they're reading, and perhaps get some new ideas of some books that they should read. And this is one that'll definitely, it's a bizarre one. We have The Trial by Franz Kafka. Now, this book was published in 1925, and it's about 230 pages in length, so it's not super big, but it's sufficiently big enough to confuse you, that's for sure. It tells the tale of Josef K, who through most of the book is just referred to as K, and he's a regular banker, sort of ordinary man who one day wakes up and is basically accosted by three men in his an apartment, and he is told that he's been accused of a crime and he needs to go through a trial. However, it is a bizarre and unclear process. No details are given about his accusation, what he's actually done. And so he goes through this whole journey of trying to find out what's happening to him. So it initially starts with these three men and, sort of accusing him of things and eating his breakfast. And, he's just generally kind of not understanding what's going on. He then goes through to the magistrate and this crowd in this special building, and he's, demanding that answers be given. And the whole process starts to become a little bit surreal, and you're like, what's going on here? Like, this doesn't really make much sense. And that feeling just continues and continues. So he eventually gets a lawyer and an advocate, and then he goes to a painter who has special insight knowledge of how this trial process works. And he is continually going down this rabbit hole of trying to, acquit himself or show or prove that he's a free man and that he did nothing wrong, despite not knowing what it is that he's actually being accused of. And this just keeps going. His work at the bank becomes intolerable, and he keeps finding these bizarre situations, and it grows ever increasing, and his feelings of desperation seem to grow and grow until it reaches a pretty abrupt and dramatic climax at the end, which I won't spoil here. I'll touch a little bit upon the author himself and maybe how this book was written. So this was written in 1914, 1915 period, but it was published posthumous. So this is why it was published in 1925, 10 years later. And he was a Czech, born in the Czech Republic or Czech, that region of the world. I'm not sure of what countries were around at that time, because this was right before World War One or / during World War One, so a lot of changes were happening in the world then. But he always wrote his books in German, I believe. So this is a translation from German into the English. He lived from 1883 and died in 1924. So this was released a year after his death. And he had a pretty rough life in many ways. He developed tuberculosis. I believe he had a bit of an alcohol addiction problem. And I'm not sure how much of this played, but into his writing style, but he wrote realism, but with a mix of the fantastical attached within it. And this will get us onto the very first theme, which is Kafkaesque, which is a surreal yet menacing feeling. So he did have a very distinct style, a way that is, you can read one of his books and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is written by Kafka, I believe. I've only read one of them, but if it definitely is a book which stands out in my mind as being pretty unique. And so what is Kafkaesque? What is this surreal yet menacing feeling? We'll look at it through the progression of K, and you can see that it's a sort of startling, but it's also a possible beginning. You can sort of imagine waking up one day and sort of having people barging into your room and accusing you of things. This happens all the time with people, SWAT people getting the wrong house and stuff. It's sort of like, okay, I can sort of understand that. And yet it quickly becomes a more sinister. So as he progresses along, it starts to become like, okay, something is really wrong here, and it's really hard to find out why. And this is why it's so perplexing. There's one particular scene which I think really highlighted just how weird this got, which was when the initial two men who broke into his apartment, or I shouldn't even say entered into his apartment. He had made a complaint of this whole process of these two people because they had asked for bribes and they'd eaten his breakfast, and he was very upset about this. And across his work one day, he walks into a closet of some sort, and the two men are there, and there's another man with them called the Whipper, and he is beating them with a rod of some sort, not to an extent to kill them or anything, but and there's even questions on how much it would actually hurt. But he's sort of just like, well, like, why is this happening in my work? This is so, strange. Why are these two men being punished? I never accused them. I didn't want them to be punished. I made a complaint, but I didn't accuse them, and I didn't want them to be hurt or anything like that. And the whole interaction is typical of everything else in the book, which is super bizarre and weird, yet somehow sort of makes sense in a way. But he eventually ends up realizing, like, okay, I can't help these two guys in any manner. And he leaves, comes back the next day, and he's passing by the same room, and he looks in again, and everything is exactly the same. The two men are still there, being whipped by this other man. And as soon as he opens the door, it's almost like the same conversation starts again. They start pleading, sir, like, we need your help. And he just shuts the door and sort of like runs away and gets angry at other people, saying like, that room's dirty, like it needs cleaning up and whatnot. I think that really, that scene in itself was just, it's so good for me because it sums up in many ways the whole book, which is just like, this doesn't make any sense. If someone from the outside saw this situation, it would be totally nonsensical. Yet for K, it almost makes sense in a very weird and bizarre way. And I'm going to keep repeating weird and bizarre because that is what this book tends to offer. And I'll even get into the definition of sort of what I've found from Kafkaesque, which is senseless, disorientating. It's distortion with a looming danger. It's perplexing and somewhat even hopeless. So these mystifying, another great word to use with this. So it's almost like all of these things wrap up in together, and you're in a dream-like state where things don't make sense, but they kind of make sense in a way. And I'd say the defining characteristic of what Kafkaesque is that sense of impending doom. So you can be confused, you can be not understanding anything, but it's when there's this feeling attached of something is wrong here, something is continually going bad, and it's sort of progressing even worse and worse. And you don't know why, and you can't really explain why as well. That I think is what you can really, that's what I certainly felt from this book, and that Kafkaesque feeling of it's real life, but it's also has that element of the fantastic thrown within, that truly bizarre thing that doesn't make sense, and yet it continues on, and it's bad in a way, like it has this negative undertone that lies throughout it. Now, the second theme I wanted to get onto was reason, which is escaping the Kafka quandry. So when we look at K, and when I look at the book, I somewhat think K is rational but not reasonable. This is a nice little quote, an idea that I've found recently, which I think explains many a thing, and I'll explain why. So his arguments in the book are rock solid. So when he goes to the magistrate, he comes up with some brilliant arguments of speeches of why this whole trial process is a sham, why there's no authority behind you as the magistrate. Who gave you the power to arrest me? How dare you do this? Like, the way I've been treated is unethical, and etc. And you read it and you're like, damn, that makes total sense. Even his decision making, like the cost benefit analysis of is impeccable. He's trying to figure out, okay, like, what's the best way to sort out this trial process? Should I continue with the advocate or this lawyer who is a bit suspicious and he's not really helping, and you see how he's behaving with other clients, and it's like, oh, no, I'm probably gonna, even though I'm unsure of this process, it's probably best if I represent myself and whatnot. He has this tireless approach to solving the problem. Like he wants to fix this trial. He wants this problem solved. And all of this is 100% rational. You look at that and you're like, that's a rational dude making rational decisions. But I don't think any part of it is reasonable. It's almost like reason is a sort of second order thinking. It has to be done over the top of your rationality. I should probably correct myself and say the reason and rationality sort of combine right at the start when he is first confronted by this accusation and realizes that he's going on a trial. That is his reaction to that is 100% understandable, which is like, I need more details. What's going on here? Why am I being accused? What am I being accused of? And, two men have entered into my place, and there was a third one in the other room as well. I need to know more info. I need to know more details because this is not part of normal life. The problem then is he continues on and he never sort of takes a step back and goes, okay, like, of all the possible information that I have, everything that's going on here, is the approach, this rational approach I'm taking, the most reasonable thing to be doing? And this is where I would argue probably not. This is where it's almost like you need to somewhat take that step back and realize like, oh, okay, let's use some logic here. Is anything I'm doing helping to solve this problem? No, because it's unsolvable. It's the trial, the magistrate, the whole process is perplexing, confusing, a mirage of different actors and people saying different things and directing him to places that don't exist. And yet when he comes up with his own fictions, like when he starts looking for I think it was Lorenz or something like that, when he just invents a name to try and find where he needs to go, then he somehow finds where he needs to go. So I think he needed to take a step back and really sort of analyze and be like, okay, that second order thinking, is this reasonable? And that's when it probably would have been like, you know what? It's more reasonable to not worry myself about everything that's going on here because I have no impact on it whatsoever anyway. It's not like the things that he was doing were helping the situation, and I would be pretty reasonably confident that if he did nothing, his situation would not worsen as well. So I like to ask a question to myself almost, which was, would he have behaved differently if this situation was non-human? So taking a step back from the book now, which was reasonable and he was rational but not reasonable. And can a situation like he was finding in this Kafkaesque surreal world of being put on trial, could that same sort of situation occur in a situation not involving other humans? So imagine if you were trying to build a house and you found that there was a bunch of termites in there, and you're like, oh, damn termites, like, I'll fix this problem by getting something that eats termites, or putting in a solution that'll deter termites from coming in. But then, this solution then makes the ground a little bit more toxic, and it's killing off your plants that are nearby. So you're like, all right, well, I'll put some more plants in here which are a bit more amenable to being around in this area where it's got this toxic solution that I use to get rid of the termites. And yet this new species of plant attracts termites to it because that's where termites like to live, or something like that. Imagine this full rotating process, cyclical circular process where you have no, you can't win in any single way. And this is just a sort of silly hypothetical, but you could imagine another situation which has a bit more implications if your life was in danger or something like that. And yet I would say that you couldn't have that same Kafkaesque surreal thing because there was no humans attached to it. Like, who are you going to blame? You can blame the termites, but termites are just doing what termites are doing. They're sort of set in stone and fact. Whereas all of these situations which are more Kafkaesque, they seem to, I can't imagine one which doesn't have humans of some sort in the mix. Now, this could be a government bureaucracy. This could be, trying to get your driver's license and you don't have the correct papers. So you go down the hallway and they direct you to here and you can't go there because you've switched your house in the last 8 months. So you need to go to this other place. And they say, well, yeah, we can give you those documents, but we need to first prove your identity. Can you show me your license? And you're like, well, that's what I'm trying to do. So you could imagine something like that. You could imagine something like if you have a partner who absolutely hates the color red, and then you say, okay, I'll start wearing blue clothes. And then because you're wearing blue clothes, they get angry at you because now you're listening to them too much, and they want a more confident partner who is confident in their own decisions and steps their foot down. So you're like, okay, I'll start wearing red. And then they hate you again because you're wearing red. I think all of these situations get back to the point where it's got humans involved, and humans can value things differently. We change over time, and there's no sort of certain fixability in humans and our decision making. So there's always going to be a bit of fluidity or something, and yet you can rely a lot more on the physical world. Like I can rely on this book to behave like a book because the atoms in it are constructed in a certain way. Like I can rely on a bird to be doing what it does because birds are always somewhat behave the same way. I'm not going to have a bird come up to me and start engaging me in a different dialect other than cheeps and tweets because, birds can't do that. Whereas humans, we seem to have this flexibility to us, which can be kind of fun in many ways, but also extremely aggravating. And if you're trapped in a Kafkaesque world with bureaucracies and governments and people changing their minds and, family dynamics and politics and all of that, just I don't know how to describe it, gooey crap, and then add some impending doom and surrealism to it. I think that's how you get yourself in a bad situation. So coming back once again to the topic of reasonable but escaping the Kafka quandary, you almost need to have that reason. So don't be too rational in certain situations, taking that step back somehow and using some logic or some reasoning to realize, okay, this is unsolvable, and trying to fix it is not helping me in any way whatsoever. So some observations and takeaways from my part. I think this book is amazingly perceptive. So this was written before the USSR, and yet it seems so identical to the feeling, the atmosphere that I got from the Gulag archipelago, particularly in the section where Alexander Solzhenitsyn was describing the time before you actually went into the gulags, which was neighbors ratting each other out, secret police coming. You get accused of something, but you're not sure of what it is, and you're put on, a trial, and the only way to get out of it is to accuse other people or to behave in this, bizarre, surreal way, and they might let you out and you can go home, but you're always knowing, like in the back of your head, they could come in the middle of the night and take me away or take my family away. I think he captured that. Like, how the hell did he capture that in this book before that sort of stuff even happened? Maybe these sort of things were happening in the Czech Republic or wherever he lived, Czechoslovakia, maybe before the USSR was invented, like created. Maybe I don't know enough about history to be honest, but man, I just feel this book was so perceptive in describing a period of history and describing certain systems that humans created, which were, I think, definitively bad and not an ideal way to live. I think as well, this book is great for having an expanding metaphor in many ways. Like you could interpret this however you wanted. You could interpret this as like depression. This is how the stages of depression go. So sort of taking it back and being like, okay, what is that feeling? Why why does this feeling occur, and the mental processes that Josef K goes through in the book. Are these mental processes similar to, I don't know, the human condition? If you're lacking meaning in life, if you're trying to find, what's the meaning of life and not getting an answer, it's unsolvable. Having dreams, or maybe even if you're caught up in the law system, or I think this is just a great book for if you're having an unsolvable problem of some sort. This book would sort of make sense in many different ways, and you could say, oh, this is a metaphor for the process of trying to get a driver's license or something like that. So in summary, I think it's an amazing description of something. I'm not exactly sure. The world he creates is a familiar and yet totally not understandable at the same time. It's such a mix of all of these different things, and the one certainty is that there's almost no certainty. It's sort of everything is up in the airs in terms of why is this trial happening to Josef K? How can he solve it? Why are these people behaving like they are? Why does they misinterpret what he's saying, and all of these just things wrapped up in together. I honestly would say I wouldn't read this if you are lacking a sort of a path in life, if you're kind of uncertain, if you're not feeling, I suppose, know what you want to do with life, if you're lacking meaning of some sort. I think this can actually be kind of unhelpful to your sanity in many ways, because it's bizarre. It is so bizarre. It's definitely a distinct book that will be hard to forget. I need to mention briefly here that this was more of a reread for me. I read this initially in 2019, and this was more of a skim over for me. I didn't read every single word of this book like I normally do, because I'd already read it before and was like, oh, I want to return to this and see if it still holds up to my impression of it initially. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. The Trial by Franz Kafka. And I would say maybe listen to the book recap that I do at the end of the month, because I'll have a bit more to explain about the metaphor that I initially took out of it, and how my reading of it this time was different from my initial reading. And that is it for today, my mere mortalites. Thank you for joining me in this weird, bizarre world of the Kafkaesque novel. Have you read any books by Kafka before, Franz Kafka? Have you ever found yourself in certain situations where everything is unsolvable, intangible, and it has this feeling of like everything is just going to get worse and worse? I'd love to know all of these. Leave a comment down below. And really do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Kyrin out.